Thank you, gentlemen, for your service on this commission and your many years of service in our military and our diplomatic corps. I want to touch on just a few issues that have already been addressed here in a little more detail. Senator Fisher talked about nuclear modernization and conventional modernization. If I understand your answers, the point is why we have to have both is what good is conventional modernization if Russia or Russia and China combined have the ability to destroy our way of life with nuclear overmatch. Is that correct, Ambassador Edelman?
I think that's one part of it, Senator Cotton. I mean, the other part of it is the fact that Russia, at least, has been using nuclear threats in a way that sees it as part of its suite of tools, including from conventional up. So it's a question of escalation dominance as well as the danger of crisis instability and attack on the homeland.
Okay. Let's turn to the question of resources that Senator Inhofe started out with and many others have addressed as well. Admiral Roughead, I'll address this towards you. The point that the report makes is that $733 billion for the next fiscal year should be considered a floor, and that we probably should be more than that, but what is especially alarming is the reports we've seen that the administration may be considered cutting 5% from the Department of Defense all the way down to $700 billion. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
There's lots of things that you recommend in this report that we ought to do as a government and as a nation. A lot of those lay in the hands, though, of people like the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the service chiefs. We're Congress. The thing we do best is pass budgets and spend the taxpayer dollar. Is the simplest thing we could do to help achieve some of the goals that you lay out in your report, repealing the Budget Control Act caps for fiscal years 2020 and 2021 and ensuring that $733 billion next year remains a floor?
I think that's the most important thing you can do. I would also add that I believe that there is a sense that the last 2 years of growth have fixed the problems. And nothing could be further from the truth, whether it's in readiness, whether it's in conventional modernization or nuclear modernization. But I think that is kind of feeding this idea that it's okay to taper down. And now is the time that we really need to have a consistent strategy going forward to build.
Those last 2 years have been a down payment.
Right.
And that last point you made there is that it's not just a matter of the level of funding, but the predictability and the smoothness of funding. This is probably something Congress should try to address early next year in a budget agreement and in a appropriations bill for the Department of Defense, as we did this year for the first time in many years.
I agree, and I would argue that the failure to pass a predictable budget has done more harm to readiness than any other thing that has happened.
Okay. Ambassador Edelman, I want to turn to you about cyber and a few of the other kind of high-tech concepts we've discussed here, artificial intelligence or quantum computing or 5G, all very critical to our defense as well as our prosperity. There is a belief in some quarters, though, that those kinds of technologies will obviate the need for more traditional weapons, that maybe the Navy can mothball some ships and subs, and the Air Force doesn't need as many fighters and bombers, and the Marines and the Army doesn't need as many trigger pullers on the front line. Is that the case? Are things like cyber and artificial intelligence, quantum computing sufficient to replace good old-fashioned trigger pullers and airplanes and ships?
Not in my view, Senator Cotton. I think, first of all, many of these technologies have great promise, but it's going to take a bit of time, first of all, to develop the technologies, and then, as Admiral Roughead said, figure out how we're going to use them operationally before you can really count on them. And I don't think that obviates the need for, in the medium term, having a strong, robust, conventional deterrent to dissuade potential adversaries for taking actions that are inimical to our strategic situation.
Thank you. In the time remaining, I'd like to turn to one final question. On page 69 of your report, in readiness, you talk about how our people are the most important asset that we have in our military. Yet the number of people who have required fitness and propensity to serve is in decline, and you recommend that DOD and Congress take creative steps to address those aspects of the problem rather than relying solely on ever higher compensation. Could you be a little more specific about what kind of creative steps you have in mind? Because I do think this is a challenge across all our services.
Well, I think clearly we need to stop looking at the accession point for those who are coming in, but look at how are we preparing young people to live and ultimately serve in this more complex environment. How are we preparing people that will be able to withstand the physical stresses of serving in the military? And so, you know, as we talked about it, it's not the entry point. It's what is being done, what are the programs, how are we investing in the youth of America to be prepared to serve in the military and in national security of the future.
Thank you, gentlemen.